So you are a foreign minister and trade minister as well, so please meet me and I'll ask you about tariffs. How have you been, given everything we've seen over the past few weeks, given what we've seen in the world today, the Trump administration, the tariffs? How have they affected you?
Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here again, and I'm very surprised that many actors from global politics, global economy, and many actors in Brussels do behave as if this was something surprising. The US presidential elections were held back in November. The campaign was almost a year long. Everybody knew what to expect from both of the candidates. After President Trump won the election, for which we are sorry to be honest in Hungary, after he won, it became obvious for everyone that the political and economic strategy that is based on patriotism, and you carry out a patriotic economic strategy, that means that customs, tariffs are in your pocket. If something is in the pocket, then sooner or later it will be used. So therefore to be honest, I don't really understand why my colleagues in Brussels and anywhere in the world were surprised about what has happened. From the very beginning, we have been urging the European Commission, Brussels, to start negotiations. Starting negotiations does not mean chit-chat. Starting negotiations with a number of superworld leaders is a serious recommendation. You put that on the table, and you are prepared to negotiate. Of course, there are obstacles to that, but that goes to the competition, which used to occur in Europe for 8 consecutive years. It was a competition that took place in Europe on March 8th, which was about who could say worse things about President Trump. And I know that those politicians who participated in this competition are not brave enough now to stand up and negotiate directly with President Trump and his team. But apart from this obstacle, we expected from the European Commission, from the bureaucrats in Brussels, who are paying tens of thousands of euros a month to start serious negotiations with the US. This did not happen. We Hungarians even made a proposal to the European Commission based on how serious a recommendation we put on the table for the Americans, and this was the result. As we know, the car industry is in the most sensitive position for both the American and European economies. Europe has been applying a 10% VAM to the import of cars from the US, while the US has been applying a 2.5% VAM to the import of cars from Europe. So our proposal was to reduce the VAM applied by the European Union from 10% to 2.5%, which is exactly the same as the VAM applied by the US to the import of cars from Europe. This would have strengthened the mutual trust, as well as the possibility of negotiation in terms of VAMs and industrial cooperation in the future. Unfortunately, the European Commission has not made this recommendation, and this is a huge mistake, a huge leadership mistake committed by the European Commission in Brussels. What happened then? We started to urge the European Commission not to implement any revenge customs, counter customs, counter VAMs, because they would not lead anywhere. They would only lead to escalation. So let's negotiate. Let's negotiate. In contrast, the decision in Brussels was to implement VMs. Only one member state voted against it, Hungary. This happened in the morning, and in the evening, President Trump announced that he would postpone the implementation for 90 days against those who have not implemented VAMs, and that the European Commission would postpone the implementation. So the problem is that the European Commission has made so many mistakes, and the leadership of the European Commission is simply not able to manage the serious problems. And I think this has been proven during the crisis times. Institutions must not be able to manage things under terrible circumstances. But when there is a crisis, when there is a need for quick decisions, when there is a need for good decisions, then it must be personal. The leaders must make decisions. And the European Commission and the leadership of the European Commission have failed before these challenges. So we hope that negotiations will be established, and this is certainly not our interest. We would like to see a sea of countries without energy sources in the heart of Europe, which is the 34th largest country by population, while 95th by population, and 75 to 80% of our exports. So our interest is, of course, an agreement on negotiations. And the European Commission is not able to implement this, unfortunately.
75-80%-át teszi ki az exportunk, tehát a mi érdekünk az természetesen egy tárgyaláson alapuló megállapodás, hogy az Európai Bizottság ezt képes-e
Peter, a new question. Let's talk about the relationship between Viktor Orbán and President Trump, because President Trump greatly appreciates Hungary.
Look, let me say that we were Trump well before Trump, because we have been in office since 2010. We won 4 consecutive elections by European policy, which is dictatorship. This is in parenthesis. So we have been Trump before Trump, because we have been carrying out a patriotic, sovereignist, political and economic strategy for a long time, not to mention migration, war, and gender propaganda. And this is exactly what President Trump has been carrying out for the past few months. We are very happy that he openly goes against the woke ideology. We are happy that he deliberately and openly opposes the global, international, liberal mainstream dictatorship, because this liberal mainstream has been putting enormous pressure on us in the last 15 years. Because in Brussels it is extremely difficult to justify that you have a right-wing government that does not support the liberal mainstream, and this is not possible in Brussels, unfortunately. So President Trump and his relationship is very close. They communicate very regularly with each other, and we hope that President Trump is going to be successful in his endeavors, because since he entered office, the world has become a safer place than before, because of the direct negotiations between the United States and Russia. And because of this, the world has become a safer place. We in Central Europe know very well that as long as we have a good relationship with Russia, it is safe for us. So the fact that they have been able to contact us less has reduced the possibility of the escalation of the war in Ukraine. And we hope that President Trump will be able to create peace, because we have been living in the shadow of war for more than 3 years, which has caused us many challenges, and we would like peace to return to Central Europe as soon as possible. In the last 3 years, since the war broke out in Hungary, we have consistently represented the position of peace talks and the ceasefire and the transition to a world peace position of ours. We have been under tremendous attack by the Democratic administration, saying that this is the European Union, that we are the propaganda of Putin. And now everyone is talking about the ceasefire and the peace talks. Of course, no one adds to this, as the Hungarians have said in the last 3 years, because politics is not about gathering the rebels.
Peter, this was very interesting. Thank you very much.